Moundsville Penitentiary in 1902 was not just a prison. It was a looming shadow over the small West Virginia town. Built of gray sandstone, its Gothic towers clawed at the sky like the fingers of some ancient beast. At night its windows glowed faintly, and townsfolk swore they saw figures pacing, shadows of men who had died long before. Children dared one another to run up the hill and touch its cold outer walls. Adults, though, crossed the street when they passed by. The prison was not a place one looked at for long. It seemed to look back. But while most feared the bars, the gallows, and the screams echoing through stone corridors, there was another rumor more curious than terrifying: the food. Prison food across the country was infamous for being foul, tasteless slop. Yet at Moundsville, men whispered that meals from the canteen were unlike any other. The reason was two women. Clara and Edith Mayfield were sisters in their late 30s, both unmarried, both quiet. They wore the same black dresses each day, starched aprons tied around their waists, and hair pinned neatly back. Their pale skin and solemn eyes gave them an almost funereal air. They had arrived at the prison nearly a decade earlier, after the death of their father, a local butcher. Where most women sought work as laundresses or seamstresses, the Mayfield sisters took the unusual post of running the prison canteen. The warden said they cooked with discipline, and perhaps that was why the men respected them. The sisters did not gossip, laugh, or chatter with guards as other women sometimes did. They spoke only when necessary, often in low voices, always with the same courtesy. "Here you are, sir," or "Eat well, child." Prisoners, hardened by crime and punishment, bowed their heads in their presence. The canteen's offerings were plain by name: stews, breads, beans, potatoes, coffee, but extraordinary in taste. Prisoners who had grown up starving in coal camps or drifting on railroads swore the stews were thicker, richer, and more nourishing than anything they had eaten even as free men. Some said a single meal carried them for days, as though the food itself had strength in it. One guard joked to another, maybe they sprinkled prayers into the broth. The reply was always the same: don't ask the sisters their recipe. In autumn of 1902, a young man arrived, Samuel Brooks, age 21. Samuel came from a farming family near Wheeling, raised by a widowed mother. Honest to a fault, he had grown up believing in justice, fairness, and the good of reform. Unlike many guards who viewed prisoners as less than human, Samuel believed men could be redeemed, that even the worst deserved dignity. On his first day, as he walked past iron doors clanging shut, he smelled something startling. Rich, savory stew drifted down the corridor. His stomach growled. A guard laughed. "That's the Mayfield sisters. Best cooks you'll ever meet in a place like this." Samuel couldn't help but wonder, why would two respectable women dedicate their lives to feeding criminals? Samuel's duties often placed him near the mess hall, where prisoners lined up with tin bowls, shuffling forward like weary soldiers. He noticed something peculiar. Every man, from pickpocket to murderer, grew quiet, almost reverent when served by the sisters. One evening, as the last of the line passed, an old prisoner named Vernon leaned close to Samuel. His beard was ragged, his eyes sunken. "Guard," he whispered, voice cracking, "don't ever ask the sisters what's in the stew. You won't like the answer." Samuel laughed, but uneasily. Something in Vernon's eyes, both fear and devotion, gnawed at him. That night, Samuel lay awake in his bunk. Rain lashed against the prison windows. He thought of his mother's bread, golden and warm, her stews made from potatoes and venison. Then he thought of the sisters' stew, thicker, darker, a taste he couldn't place. Too rich, too heavy, almost metallic. The thought unsettled him. Was it just prison hunger making food taste strange, or something else? He turned in his bed, but Vernon's words echoed. "Don't ever ask." Weeks later, Samuel walked the row of cells when he found Thomas Hayes, a young thief, curled on his cot with fever. Thomas grabbed Samuel's arm and whispered through chapped lips, "I saw them, guard. Down by the cold cellar, buckets of blood, not from cows, not from pigs. I swear it. Samuel froze. You're raving, Hayes. Fever dreams. But Hayes clutched harder. I know the smell of hog's blood. This wasn't it. This was worse. Samuel pulled free, unsettled. He told himself prisoners often invented tales to torment guards. Still, he couldn't shake the image. One evening, Samuel was stationed near the canteen after hours. A low hum drifted from behind the wooden door, soft, rhythmic, like chanting. He crept closer, peering through a crack in the frame. Inside, the sisters stood over a large black pot, steam rising in ghostly coils. Their eyes were closed, lips moving in unison. Words Samuel didn't recognize slipped into the air, half prayer, half incantation. The steam smelled of iron, of blood. He stumbled back, heart pounding, afraid they might see him. But when the door creaked, the chanting ceased instantly. Silence fell. For days, Samuel debated telling the warden. But what could he say? That two women were praying over stew? That a sick thief claimed buckets of blood were in the cellar? If he spoke and was wrong, he would lose his post, and his mother depended on his wages. If he stayed silent and something terrible was happening, wasn't he complicit? Each time he passed the canteen, he saw the sisters ladling steaming food into bowls, their faces calm, eyes unreadable. The prisoners, dangerous men, sat with heads bowed as if in church. And Samuel wondered, what truth was he walking past every day? One afternoon, as Samuel finished his shift, Edith Mayfield approached him quietly. She carried a small parcel wrapped in linen. "For your mother," she said softly, pressing it into his hands. Samuel blinked. How did you know I have a mother?" Edith only smiled faintly. A good son carries his family in his eyes. "We see more than most, Guard Brooks." He unwrapped the cloth later in his quarters. Inside lay a small loaf of bread, fragrant, golden brown, still warm. Samuel stared at it, unsettled. They had never once asked about his life, and yet they knew. Winter fell harshly on Moundsville. The walls sweated with damp cold and tempers rose. One evening, a dispute in the yard exploded into chaos. Prisoners hurled stones, overturned benches, and shouted curses at guards. Samuel stood among the riflemen, his finger trembling near the trigger. If the warden gave the order, dozens could die. Then the sisters appeared. Clara carried a steaming pot, Edith a basket of bread. Without speaking, they stepped into the riot. Prisoners froze, baffled. Clara ladled stew into bowls, handing them out calmly, while Edith tore bread with her pale hands, distributing it piece by piece. Men dropped their fists, sitting cross-legged on the frozen ground, eating silently. The riot dissolved into clinking spoons. Guards lowered their rifles in disbelief. Samuel's heart pounded. He had never seen violence extinguished by food. But beneath his awe lay unease. What power could make men this savage suddenly docile? That night, driven by both fear and curiosity, Samuel stole a ring of keys from the guardhouse. When his shift ended, he slipped into the canteen after hours. The air smelled faintly metallic. He descended the narrow stone stairs into the cellar, lantern trembling in his hand. What he found chilled him. Wooden barrels lined the walls, marked not with words, but with strange symbols carved into their sides. The lids were sealed tight with iron clasps. A sweet, sickly odor clung to the room, making his stomach twist. Hands shaking, Samuel pried open one lid. Inside was flesh, pale, bloated, unrecognizable, floating in brine. Not pork, not beef. Something worse. A whisper of movement behind him froze his blood. He turned, and the lantern's glow revealed two figures standing silently at the bottom of the stairs. Clara and Edith. Clara's voice was calm, but there was no warmth in it. "You shouldn't be here, Samuel." Edith's eyes shone in the lantern glow, sharp and sorrowful. Some things you do not understand save lives more than rules ever will. Samuel stammered, This is wrong. This is monstrous. Clara stepped closer, resting a hand on his arm. Her touch was strangely gentle. And yet, it feeds hundreds who would otherwise starve in spirit. Do you not see? We give the condemned one last chance at purpose. In death, they nourish life. Samuel's stomach turned, but when he looked into their eyes, he saw no malice, only a weary kind of mercy. The sisters explained what no man outside their kitchen had ever heard. Once each month, a prisoner awaiting execution was offered a choice, to walk to the gallows or to surrender his body, giving sustenance to the very men he once lived among. It was not forced, no one was tricked, each chose with clear mind. Samuel recoiled. You mean you make men eat? Edith cut him off. We make nothing. They eat because their hunger is greater than their fear. And those who give, they do so to be remembered with gratitude, not hatred. Samuel thought of the riot, the calm, the peace that Stu had given. Could it really be true that the condemned offered themselves willingly? That night Samuel wrote to his mother, though he kept his words vague. Dearest mother, can sin ever serve good? If an act appears monstrous but spares suffering, is it still evil, or is it a sacrifice misunderstood? He never mailed the letter. He burned it in his lamp flame instead, terrified of leaving evidence. Every day he watched the prisoners eat. They licked their bowls clean, smiled faintly, even joked like ordinary men. Some grew less violent, more human, and Samuel wondered, was he witnessing horror or a strange kind of grace? One evening, Thomas Hayes, the fevered thief, summoned Samuel to his bedside. His eyes were sunken, but his voice was steady. I don't want the rope, Thomas whispered. I want to serve one last time. Maybe my worthless life can mean something after all. Samuel's chest tightened. He had seen Thomas weep like a child in his fever. Now he saw only calm resolve. The sisters brought a leather-bound ledger. Thomas signed his name, hands shaking but his face serene. Samuel turned away, unable to watch further. When Thomas was gone, the sisters cooked. That evening's stew was thicker than ever. The prisoners ate in silence, some bowing their heads. No one asked questions. Samuel could not eat, but in the men's eyes he saw gratitude, not horror. The next day the prison was quiet. For once no shouting echoed through the halls, no fists slammed against bars. Prisoners worked calmly, ate respectfully, even smiled faintly at the guards. Samuel carried a heavy pit in his stomach. He wanted to scream, to expose everything. But then he saw a group of inmates huddled around the fire, sharing stories, laughing softly, the first laughter he had ever heard inside those walls. Thomas Hayes was gone, yes, but his presence lingered, not as fear, but as nourishment, as memory. Samuel realized with dread and awe that in this place of death, a condemned thief had become more of a savior than a criminal. The sisters found Samuel on the corridor steps. Clara spoke first. You've seen our truth. Now you must choose. Will you expose us and let this place descend into chaos, or protect what you cannot explain, even if it weighs on your soul forever? Samuel's mouth went dry. Every part of him longed to scream, "This is evil," to demand justice. And yet, he remembered the riot dissolving into silence, Thomas's peace in signing his name, the way hardened men treated the sisters not with mockery, but reverence. He was a young man, idealistic still, but in that moment, Samuel learned the hardest truth of adulthood. Not all choices were between good and evil. Some were between horrors, and the one that harmed least. Samuel chose silence. He never again pried into the cellar, nor asked the sisters questions. He carried the secret like a stone in his chest. Yet the knowledge changed him. Where other guards barked orders and swung clubs, Samuel spoke with calm authority. He listened when prisoners spoke. He treated them not as beasts, but as men whose lives, however broken, still held weight. The prisoners noticed. They began to call him Good Guard Brooks. They obeyed his words quicker than they did the warden's. Samuel never told them why he had softened. He never revealed the truth that haunted him, that their peace came not from kindness alone, but from the flesh of their own. Years later, when Samuel was an old man with silver hair, he sat on his porch in Wheeling, watching his grandchildren play. Sometimes visitors asked about his time at Moundsville. Was it as brutal as they say? Someone would ask. Why did men behave better in those days? Another would wonder. Samuel always gave the same answer. Because some souls gave more than anyone will ever know. He never spoke the sisters' names aloud again, nor what they had done, but in his silence he honored them, not as monsters, but as women who found mercy in the most macabre way imaginable. And so the legend of the Macabre Prison Canteen Sisters lived on, not merely as a tale of horror whispered through bars, but as a story of sacrifice, strange grace, and the haunting truth that even in the darkest prisons, humanity can take the most unexpected forms.